So to understand what pseudo class is, let's take an element that we created here. Let's take this box element, which is this red square that I created here. And then let's just write the class again. So box. And then to begin your pseudo class declaration, all you need to do is type in semicolon. And then doing this, you can, that's how you can begin writing any pseudo class that you want. So hover, for example, I mean, that's a pseudo class technically. So for example, if you type in, I mean, you're probably familiar with hover, but if you type in something like display none, you hover over it and then it disappears. And that's a pseudo class. But another pseudo class is before and after. And these function very differently from hover because these are actually different elements that are created, but they're not actual HTML elements. They're just pseudo elements that appear as though they are HTML elements, but they're actually CSS pseudo elements. So for example, to understand this, let's create a before element here, a before pseudo element. So we got box before here, and then the first thing to know about writing any pseudo element is the content. So content is a string that you can write here, so you can just write anything, any text here. So if we write before element here, it's going to show up before element. You can see before element. And then yeah, so that's a pretty basic idea of what a before pseudo element is. And then we have also a after pseudo element, and if we write here after element, you can see the after element shows up. And now these are our primary pseudo elements. These are the most common ones that people use, and you might be wondering what the difference is between before and after. Well, we can understand a little bit better the difference when we take our box div here, this that we're writing the pseudo element for, and then if we go in here and then we write anything, let's write this is the box div. So once that shows up, you can see here that this is the box div is showing up right here, and then lo and behold, what comes before this is the box div is the before element, and then what comes after this is the box div is the after element. And the reason for this is, as the name, the before element actually would go right in here, and then the after element would go right in here. So no matter how much code I write inside, no, not code, but no matter how much HTML I write inside of this box div, the before element is always going to be the first thing, and then the after element is always going to be the last thing. So let's say, just to really, let's say we have like a new div here, and then class equals child, and I already created a child class here, and then all that is a little square, and even if we go ahead here and we put a bunch of these, the before element is always going to be before, and then the after element is always going to be after. So that's one important thing to know when creating a before and after pseudo element, and one important thing to consider when deciding whether to use a before or an after element. Alright, so now that we have created our before element, before pseudo element, let's see more of what it can do. So basically what it can do is it can function almost entirely as a normal HTML element. So let's make it into a separate div, for example. So in order to do that, we go here to the before element, and then we set the width to like 100 pixels or something, and then we set the height to 100 pixels, and then background to white. And then now it's only going to show up here. It's not, the actual width and the height aren't going to actually appear. The only thing that's going to appear is the background color. And the reason for this is that in order for you to actually make it behave like a div, weirdly enough, you need to set the position of it to absolute. And then now you're actually getting a div. And this can be super useful for so many applications. And like, say for example, if you have a client and they already have their HTML laid out, and you don't have access to their HTML, but you do have access to a style sheet for some reason. I mean, it's happened to me. And then you want to create another div, well, you can do it through CSS in this way. But anyways, it's still not completed because, as you can see, the position is absolute. So if we were to, I don't know, like set if you wanted to set a specific position to this before pseudo element, like top 20 pixels or something, it's going to set it relative to the entire window. So for example, if I say top 0 pixels and then left equals 0 pixels and then background color equals black, you can see that it's all the way in the top left here. And we don't want that. What we do want is we want it to be relative to this box itself. Because, you know, if we were to take this box and move it 100 pixels, this would be unaffected, and that's not what we want. So then in order to do that, we go ahead here and then we go to the parent element, the element that is the parent of the pseudo element, and then we go here to the parent of the pseudo element, and then we set the position to relative. And now the pseudo element behaves relative to the parent element. And now if we were to take out position absolute, you know, it would lose its functionality as a div. So we got to keep that in there, and we need to have the parent's position as relative. And so doing this, you can now set the position to wherever you want relative to the div. And this is very important because sometimes you want to move the parent div and have the pseudo element move with it. You don't want them being independent of each other. Yeah, so, and then everything you're doing here for the before pseudo element, you can do for the after pseudo element. And you're always, whenever you're doing after and before elements, you always need to have a content set for it, even if it's an empty content, because if you take it out, it disappears. So it needs, always before and after elements always need this content, and they always need these two quotation marks. Yeah, and yeah, so this is super useful. You can do so many different things with it, and yeah.